thank you for all of that. And we're going to move right in with Lamont, who's going to introduce our first presenter for the day.
Thanks, Dave. So I have the honor of introducing a good friend to the industry and a U.S. Marine. So hang on just a minute. T. William Coniam is a loss control specialist in Copper Point Insurance Companies. He served in the United States Marine Corps and was honorably discharged as a sergeant. I'm very pleased to hear that. I appreciate all of your service. I have two sons who are Marines, so I know exactly how that feels. William has worked in the insurance industry for 14 years in various roles, including customer service, producer, and claims, but he has spent the last 9 years in loss control, as Dave mentioned. As a loss control specialist and an OSHA authorized trainer, William provides consultation services to Arizona businesses with their risk management and occupational safety and health. He has earned his bachelor's degree from Arizona State University. He has earned the Certified Safety Professional, CSP, and Associate Safety Professional, ASP, certifications from the Board of Certified Safety Professionals. He has earned his CPCU, AU, API, AINS, I know all of you know those acronyms, designations from the institutes, and the Certified Fire Protection Specialist certification from the National Fire Protection Association. How do you have time to raise kids? My goodness, William. William is also a Lean Six Sigma Yellow Belt, and his volunteer work includes serving on the City of Surprise Board of Trustees, where he oversees their self-insured medical and workers' compensation programs. He also coaches. He does provide smoke detector installation with the Arizona Burn Foundation and numerous K-12 educational support activities. Please join me in welcoming William.
Hi. My turn?
Yep. Yes.
Can you hear me okay with this?
Yes.
Yes.
Cool. Let me just move that more. All right. All right, sorry about that. So as you said, William Coniam, I want to start off by asking though.
We can all wait back.
So I'm not just waiting.
Well, just don't move too far away.
Yep, I guess I will stand here. All right, sorry about that. So I want to start by asking, how many in the room back in high school knew you wanted to work in the insurance industry? Show of hands. A single one. That's pretty common, right? No one really, well, not no one, but it's very rare for someone to say, I want to work in insurance. So to share my story, I was in the Marine Corps. I came back from deployment. It's the end of 2008, so it's the height of the recession, and I needed an internship to finish my degree at ASU. So I was able to get an internship in the insurance industry. Why did I take that one? Because it's a paid internship, right? Hey, you get paid for this, all right, I'll do it. So one thing led to another, and I just kind of continued on the insurance industry from there. And I kind of said, well, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to be good at it. And so I just continued to advance myself, continue with professional development, all of those certifications, designations, as Mr. Boyd was referencing there. Because you don't really think about them all until they're laid out like that. So I've been doing quite a bit of this. So anyway, I'm here to talk. I'm sorry. So I'm here to talk about loss control's role in risk management. I'm used to walking around. I'm having to remember not to walk around. So, so talking to you about loss control. So it's one of the areas that maybe people don't kind of think about too much. So I'll be talking about what it's like working in loss control and kind of what we do. So to keep it fairly simple, we have kind of two simple goals. We're trying to reduce the probability of a loss occurring and reduce the impact of losses that do occur. In insurance terms, that means we're reducing the frequency and severity of losses. I like to say it's kind of like the rest of the insurance industry, you're kind of dealing with the loss after it occurs, right? Trying to restore them to their state. But loss control came in and we're like, hey, what if the loss never happened in the first place, right? Let's stop it from happening in the first place. So that's kind of our whole role. It is not like me today. I'm sorry, everyone. So how do we do that? So we assist in identifying and analyzing businesses' risk management needs. We do that through facility and job site surveys, claims history analysis. We're going to help determine the most appropriate techniques for addressing those needs and help implement effective procedures and monitor those results. Since it's football season, I like to say it's almost like an offensive line, right? If you're doing your job well, then people are kind of going to wonder, why do we even need this, right? You want to be the people that are there doing such a good job that people question if your job's actually even necessary. We provide consultation service for regulatory compliance issues as well. So if this is a good fit for you, well, if you prefer an office environment that looks something like that, quite frankly, loss control is not going to be for you. We're out there in the field a lot, meeting with people. Our office environments are going to be more like this. You might be at a construction site, cold storage warehouse, or all sorts of other businesses, or in meetings, whether that's meeting with the clients or meeting with others in the insurance industry. I'm frequently having meetings with underwriters and claims adjusters and so forth, all working on how are we going to help this client out. If you like working from home, it's a good fit for you. Almost all loss control personnel work from home. So if you like, hanging out in the beanbag chair, or if you have young kids, that's something I've always really enjoyed. That's frankly my favorite part about this job is that I do work from home and you make your own schedule. So as long as you're a go-getter, and you're able to manage your own time, it's really good because I'm able to, for example, I often will do where I take my daughter to school and then I go to my first appointment. So I'm always able to take her to school every single day. I've been able to coach their soccer leagues, things like that, because I can make my schedule work to my family's needs. But you're also often out on the road. Bye. Dropping out of the road. So it's that's one thing I've rigged up. Purchased it, connected to your steering wheel. Because often I'm out in between appointments and you try to get those write-ups done. So you're not having to do it when you get back home. So you're often working out of your car as well, just like it's your little office. Prior employment, I used to cover all of Arizona. So you're out there on the road a lot. It just depends on the company you work for, what your territory is. But as you can see, that was just 1 month. I was out there. Sholo, Prescott, Dewey, Tucson, Casa Grande, Sierra Vista, Benson. That was just 1 month. That was March. And that's April. So fairly similar. Prescott, Stafford, Tucson, etc. So I was out there on the road a lot. That's part of the reason I decided to switch companies. So just to contrast that, in July, that's what my territory looked like now, much more closer to home. So it really depends. I mean, if you like to travel and go out there all over the place, loss control can be a good fit for that. And if you want it to be more close to home, just depending on what company you're working for, some companies you'll have a territory that's multiple states. So you'll be traveling, Arizona, Nevada, California, so forth. So I had a brief stint as a producer, as an agent. And one time I was doing an interview and I was mentioning this and I said, I can do sales, but I hate sales. And he's like, well, have you ever had a time where you had to make a recommendation to someone about how to control something and they don't want to do it? Yeah, all the time. Well, what'd you do? Well, you talk about kind of the economic benefits and the hidden costs and the cost savings that they'll have by doing that. So you sold them on that risk management. Oh yeah, I guess so. You don't really think of it that way. I mean, it's more persuasion, but it is similar to sales. So you do have to have that need to sell the client or management. So if you're like the internal loss control person, you have to be able to sell them on that control you're recommending to them. You do that by talking about the economics of safety. Talk about the cost savings. You can talk about different hidden costs, future insurance costs due to higher experience rating, costs to hire, retrain, replacement employees, damage reputation, right? Imagine if you have a company vehicle and someone's texting and driving and they, go through a school zone and run over a child. Imagine the negative publicity you're going to have for that of, hey, Joe's air conditioning just killed the child because their driver was texting and driving. Huge impact to your business. And then you can also use tools like OSHA's safety case program. It's a good website, osha.gov/business case. They've got calculators and so forth in there. You talk about the return on investment. So the Center for Construction Research and Training, CPWR, has a construction solutions ROI calculator to help you analyze the return on investment that you have for implementing new procedures or new materials, things like that, to help increase your safety. The Liberty Mutual, the Research Institute for Safety, they've done studies and they've shown that for every dollar you invest in safety, you tend to see a $3 to $6 return on investment. So investing in safety is very important for business and helps them out a lot more than they think. A lot of that's like, oh, I don't want to buy those new respirators or whatever it is, but it'll help them out in the long run. Besides the work-life balance, my favorite thing is you learn something new every day. We sit in claims, and when I started claims, they said, it's awesome. Every day is something different. I was bored 3 months in. I was like, no, everything is the same. But maybe that's just me. But so I like to learn new things. I've always been passionate about being a lifelong learner. That's part of why I have all these designations. And in loss control, you're constantly going into new businesses, new industries, constantly learning. So just you might have new industries. For example, cannabis industry has been a huge impact lately. And from my perspective, it's sort of like a cross between like tobacco and food and beverage processing and chemical manufacturing and retail, right? All of these kind of merged into one. They're doing a lot of crazy things in there. And so you're constantly having to evaluate these new industries. You also have nanotechnology and biofuels. We work with algae. You have to analyze these new industries, what kind of hazards are presented there, and how we get control of those hazards. New processes. So like the NIOSH Future Work Initiative, they come up with all these things that they're kind of monitoring and changes. But just kind of for quick examples, 3D printing is a new thing. Robotics, you might put, let's say, a robotic arm in to do a task that was dangerous for an employee to do. So you help to manage that hazard. However, now you also have to think, okay, if this robotic arm moves and strikes an employee that's walking by, well, that's a new hazard being presented. How are we going to control that hazard? New materials. Perfect example of this is countertops. So your countertop manufacturer, when you're cutting into this granite, you're going to be dealing with silica. Roughly 10 to 45% of that granite is going to be silica. So you're creating RCS, respirable crystalline silica, that your employees can be breathing in. Now you switch over to engineered stone, and that's often 93% or more silica. So you may have had a control that was adequate for granite countertops, but you go engineered stone, and it's no longer going to be adequate. So it's just a lot more crystalline than you originally factored for. One of our industrial hygienists did a sample on an engineered stone. It was 100% silica. So it's just a vastly different ballgame. So every time you're dealing with all these changes, you're constantly experiencing new hazards and new controls that you have to come up with. You have to figure out how are we going to address this in a reasonable manner. Something I like to point out is, so children ask 144 to 390 questions every day, right? So think about how many questions you ask. Be willing to ask those questions, to learn new things. I think it just makes your overall life better, and it makes, frankly, your jobs more enjoyable. I feel like to be out there and constantly learning new things. Bored of it. So, talked about kind of the career in loss control. Just talked about how loss control works. What do we do on our daily activity to address the loss control? And how do we actually do this? A big factor of it, before you ever go to a client, is you need to do a claims history analysis. This is just kind of a very basic chart, just showing claims type policy year and essentially frequency and severity. And then you want to be looking at, in this example, we're looking at kind of the causes of loss. So in this example, you'll see, so they've got strains. They've got about 27 strains for about $50,000 in claims. And typically, we're going to focus a little bit more on the frequency of claims because the severity is sort of random. You can say be 3 feet up on a ladder, fall down, be perfectly fine. Like you land at your feet, nothing happens. I have the experience where someone's fallen 3 feet off a ladder, happen to hit their head and die. Okay? How often does that happen? Not very often. But that's why we focus a little bit more on the frequency. You might see, for example, well, we've had a motor vehicle crash, that was $75,000 claim. Okay, but there was one of those. So generally speaking, a lot of other variables involved, we might focus more on strains. So just for illustration purposes here, so we want to do a deeper dive into their strain injuries. So we start looking at the strains and we see, wow, 51% of those are from lifting. So you really want to analyze with that company, okay, what are your material handling practices? What kind of devices do you have to help them in moving these devices around? What are your practices? And make sure they're properly trained on that and using those equipment to help minimize the lifting injuries. Other things you could be doing is you want to make sure you're doing the normalization of the data. So, for example, here, a lot of our construction contractors, huge boom in the past few years. The business was doubling and tripling. So you might see, oh man, our claims have gone, way higher. Well, you want to normalize that data based on your payroll, right? And see, if you've doubled your employees and your claims went up, let's just say 25%. All right, so it's not as big of a concern as we initially thought. So it helps normalize the data. This is just an example using a total reportable incident rate. Other things you could be looking at, for example, is the tenure of employee when they were injured. In this example, you can see they're having a huge number of their losses from 0 to 6 months or 6 to 12 months. That first year of employment. And that last one, it is kind of coming back up again. That's everyone over 5 years. So a much larger chunk of the population in that. So that's why you put a little bit more emphasis on those first two. And you probably want to talk to them about, well, what kind of employee training programs are you doing? If they're not doing an adequate job training those new employees. You can look at things like the day of the week. That's something a lot of people don't realize. So in this example, you got 45% of your injuries on a Monday. So you can be talking to them, and maybe, for example, you want to start doing a safety refresher training every Monday. Kind of get safety first thing on the mind. Another factor, and just had this with a client recently, employee Monday morning, oh, I hurt my foot. They look at the security cameras and they see when they were coming into work that day, they were limping because they hurt their foot over the weekend, and then they try to act like it happened at work. Not to say that happens all the time, but it's something to be aware of when you see a lot of, for example, Monday injuries. So, when I was asked about doing this, and so I said, you can talk about what loss control is. It's kind of difficult to say, hey, we're going to talk about your entire career, and you have less than an hour to do it, right? It's pretty hard to do with pretty much any career. But just to kind of illustrate sort of a loss control mindset, the NIOSH hierarchy of controls helps a lot with that. So I'm going to kind of run through, basically what these each are. And so generally speaking, the top is going to be the most effective. Anytime we can, we want to focus at that level and kind of be working our way down. So just start off by explaining, elimination, which is going to be you're physically removing the hazard. So you're completely avoiding the risk. So you're either choosing not to do the operation, you're discontinuing it, you're designing that out of your process. And the thing is about elimination and substitution. So they're the most effective at reducing hazards, but they also tend to be the most difficult to implement in an existing process. So the process is still in the design or development stage. It may be inexpensive and simple to implement. For an existing process, major changes in equipment or procedures may be required to eliminate or substitute the hazard. Another common way people will do this is they outsource or kind of sub it out. So you're transferring the risk to an outside source. Very easy example for that is cranes, right? Rather than have to have your own crane, very expensive piece of equipment, and train an operator for that, most companies these days are just subbing that out. And it used to be even that they would just rent the crane, but they'd have to have their own operator for it. Very happy to hear that pretty much no one does that anymore. Now you usually rent the crane and the operator at the same time. Because imagine, the liability involved, right? With trying to have your own employee operate a crane and they've done it, once in their life or whatever, right? So when you outsource, the outsource company gets to focus their energy and resources on their expertise, allowing you to concentrate on the business that you know. You can do other elimination. Is this chemical or particulate that we're working with truly necessary? Maybe you don't, need to use that. You can use something else to have more substitution. Working from heights. So maybe you can perform your tasks where possible at ground level rather than working from an elevated position. For example, maybe using a drone to investigate an issue up on a roof or higher up. You can have a component on a roof and you bring it down to the ground to work on it. Telescoping light bulb, which basically instead of having to be on a ladder and changing out the light that way, there's light bulbs that's spring loaded. You can change the light with that. No longer do you have to be on a ladder. It also helps out with muscular shoulder strains. So you're using that as well. Moving on to substitution. So substitution, you're replacing the hazard. So chemical substitution is an easy example. You're changing, for example, a flammable liquid for non-combustible or low VOC paints. So maybe you were doing some kind of spray painting. Do you really need this flammable spray paint, or can you switch to a non-combustible paint? A lot less hazards associated there. Other less hazardous process, for example, would be trenching. So when you're trenching, the walls can cave in on you with essentially no warning, and you cannot move out of the way in time. Even though a small amount of dirt may not be seen as that treacherous, 1 cubic yard of dirt can weigh more than 3,000 pounds. So trenching substitutions, you're looking at directional boring, relining the pipe ramming, so forth. Onto engineering controls. So in engineering controls, you're trying to isolate people from the hazard. Benefit of engineering controls versus some of these next ones is you require little or no employee action. Right? So it's be things like ventilation, shielding, or guarding. So in these examples, I've got a paint booth and a mix room up there. As long as your employees doing the operations in that room and it's turned on, right? For example, if you're painting in a booth, you're going to have the ventilation. It's just passively going on there. They don't need to do anything here, to handle that. You're going to have the sprinkler system or the extinguishing system, explosion-proof lighting. It vastly reduces the hazard posed by your spray painting operations simply by being there. Working at heights, so you can install guardrails or cover the holes. Chemical skin exposure, implement a see-through barrier between the workstation and the hazard and less risk of chemical splash. Providing warning devices such as lights and horns on equipment. Just an example from a hotel I did. It was a pretty new hotel, and every time the employees needed to go up on that roof, they did this. Put the step ladder out there, went up on that top cap, which you're never supposed to stand on it. We all know that for when you're putting up your Christmas lights, right? You're not supposed to stand on the top step. Not only would they go step on the top step, but they have to jump from the top step to get onto the roof. I thought it was kind of funny, so I took a picture of it and I went to it because I needed to go up there. So, and I'm a little guy, as you can tell, so it was a good jump for me too. But yes, very simple solution. Just put a built-in ladder. Like, there's no reason your employees should be having to do this every single time. Another example, so countertop slabs, we kind of spoke about those earlier. Those are extremely heavy. Rather than have to have people physically manually moving these, simple use of a jib crank to help move the countertop slabs. This is the same countertop manufacturer. It's a little bit tough to see, but I mean, you can see a lot of the dust on the ground, obviously, and then you can see these kind of light streaks from the lights, just the amount of dust in the air there. So they have, quote unquote, controls in place. They're clearly inadequate. The other thing is, so this employee here, he's got a respirator on, but these are other people that are in the room. And even if it's just a short period of time, just to illustrate, an industrial hygienist was doing some sampling on countertop installers. So they were installing in the kitchen. They'd already kind of pre-cut the countertops, but they just had to do 3 more cuts, right, to get it properly positioned. 3 cuts, and it put them over that permissible exposure limit. So it's very easy to be above the exposure limits for silica doing this kind of countertop manufacturing. So even these people just being in there for 15 minutes, then they very well may have been overexposed. And so they've got these little local ventilation things that Frank Berry showed. You have to be right up against them, and I mean, you can just see by the level of dust in the air, they're not adequate. I mean, look at the level of dust on the filters. Who knows if they've ever changed those? They've got these as kind of we did something to help out right there, but they're not useful. So you got to make sure you have adequate controls for your uses. So why do we need to do all this, right? Well, so using that OSHA safety calculator I mentioned earlier with silicosis, so this is kind of an average silicosis claim. Direct costs, indirect costs, I'll just jump to combined costs, you're looking at $314,000. Okay? By the way, if you get to end stage silicosis, the only medical treatment available is to do a lung transplant. So it's no joke. So let's just say you're a countertop manufacturer and let's say you do 3% profit margin on all of your sales. To make back that $314,000, it's going to take you over $10 million in sales to make back that cost. Again, if you're curious to look that up, OSHA.gov safety-based estimator, really good resource to help convey the importance of this risk management. So how do we control the silica, right? So just using an example of a handheld power saw, cutting through some concrete masonry units. The blue bar on the right side is going to show the measured amount of dust in the operator's breathing zone. So just doing a normal dry cut through it. We're looking at the rating is 85.95, we'll call it. So it's normal dry cut. Now, if you do a wet, so you're injecting water as well while you're doing the cutting, it cut down the percentage, I think it was like about 60-something%, dropped you all the way to 32.56. Okay. Now, if you have a vacuum, exhaust ventilation, so it's automatically, vacuuming up that dust as you're cutting, drops it all the way down to 3.4. So a huge decrease in the amount of dust in the operator's breathing zone. Wearable technologies, that's definitely an emerging, industry. Advances in the technologies has really allowed you to be able to have sensors on things from clothing, watches, helmets, eyewear, and then obviously you always have to be aware of the different implications. So something like an exoskeleton, which I'll show on the next slide, that's going to be more of a physical burden. But other things that are smaller, and for example, like implantable devices, right? That's going to be more of a concern because now you're having intrusiveness or ethical concerns by trying to say, hey, employees, we all want you to implant this in your skin. How well is that going to go over, right? So a worker wearing an exoskeleton can reduce the physical load on their body and potentially prevent some musculoskeletal disorders. That's an example one there. A study of forward bend lifting using exoskeleton research has found that exoskeletons decrease their total work, fatigue, and load while improving the posture. Another example of wearable technology is work-wear proximity sensor. And be notified if a piece of heavy equipment is approaching them, or you can have smart vehicles that monitor workers in the vicinity and immediately stop or avoid those workers. Just use another example, say a funeral home, a crematory. So we talked earlier about strains, right? So these are ways you can help out with some of those strain injuries. So you can have the hydraulic scissor lift for lifting up the cases. So a case is funeral home term for the body in the coffin. So you have the hydraulic scissor lift to lift it up, and then you place it onto this table loader, and the table loader pushes the coffin into the retort chamber. Then you also can see over here that these have computer control systems, which are going to be greater automation for temperature and oxygen sensors. Not only is it going to make it more efficient, but in the crematory industry, there's been a lot of issues with oversized cases, as they're termed. Larger bodies, overweight bodies, they just burn differently, a lot harder. So help manage those hazards. You have mortuary body lifts. So when they're doing the embalming, you need to move the cases around rather than have to have employees physically trying to move them. You have some body lift, something like this, help greatly reduce any kind of strain injuries. And whenever you're doing a control, you want to make sure that you don't inadvertently, cause another hazard. So in this situation, this is an AC contractor. They need to stop all their, or protect their compressed gas cylinders from damage or being knocked over. So they built this nice little rack system. It looks pretty good, right? The problem is they put their oxygen and settling right next to each other. Your oxygen cylinders have to be at least 20 feet from any kind of fuel gases or have a non-combustible barrier. So, good initiative, bad judgment is a phrase we've used in the Marines. So it's a good idea, but let's actually execute this a little differently. Moving on down to administrative controls. So with this, you're changing the way that people work. So the downside of these, as opposed to the engineering control, is these are going to require employee action. Okay? So you're controlling the risk through work practices. So worker job rotating, for example, if you're an assembly line and, let's make it really simple, very basic task on an assembly line, you could not only rotate what workers doing each thing, but even just simply having them switch sides they're working on. So instead of always twisting to the right, now, for an hour they're twisting to the left, simple things like that. This is going to be things like training your employees in safety training, increased supervision, having controlled access areas, the confined space entry permits is a, very easy example for that. And then other procedures you have in place for like your hazardous communication, your SDS sheets, and then lockout, tag out, which I'll talk about in a moment. But again, a lot of times in my industry, you come in and first thing they think of is safety training. Okay, so what are you training on how to address this? But keep in mind that hierarchy, you really want to try to address your hazards higher up with much more effective solutions, and these are going to be less effective because they really do require employee action. So water guard, for example, so they were having, their loss history data show they were having a lot of slip, trip, fall incidents, and they're increasing after about 3 hours after the park opened. So the problem that as they analyzed it further was that guests were getting tired after repeatedly climbing up the stairs to the slide. So they're having numerous slips and falls on the stairs. So they determined to delay the guest admission to the slide, creating less crowding on the slide stairways, especially after 1 p.m. Another thing they were experiencing was collisions at the base of the slide. So they increased their interval between sliders to avoid collisions at the base of the slide. So ultimately got them out with those liability claims. Lockout, tag out. So these are specific practices and procedures to safeguard employees from unexpected energization or startup of machinery equipment or the release of hazardous energy during service or maintenance activities. So you're going to want to do lockout, tag out whenever you have employees that are servicing or maintaining any kind of equipment that has hazardous energy, whenever the machinery is being installed or removed, and when any kind of guard or other safety device is bypassed or removed. So for example, this person's working on a conveyor belt system. Very easy that they could be injured while working on that. You want to make sure it's completely locked out. You don't just flip a switch, call it good. Worker crawled into this hay bale cutting machine to dislodge a hay bale without locking it out first. So you see where they entered. This weight activated the guillotine cutting blade, which struck him, killing him. Machinery had warning signs regarding lockout. They were ignored. That's been played moved up. So having a sign on it isn't enough, right? That's the problem with these. You know, we talked about administrative controls to require employee action. So they have these procedures in place, but if an employee ignores the procedures, now he's dead. Last line of defense, PPE. So you're protecting your worker with personal protective equipment. That's another thing. People, oh, it's noisy in here, earplugs. Okay, well, how can we reduce that noise in the first place? This is, last line. Last line of defense, I just mentioned that. It requires your individual employee action. So it's not even a company-wide thing. You have to rely on them to actually properly put their earplugs in, or wear their safety glasses and so forth. So I'm hearing it so much, especially with COVID, with masks and everything. Oh, I don't want to wear my safety glasses. Now they fog up. Okay, so now everyone's having eye injuries. So they're less reliable. They're hard to manage. It's going to be all sorts of different PPE. I'll speak to on the other slides here. So hard hats, for example. So this was a hard hat that was hit by a large branch. The hard hat took the impact, cracked inside the person's skull. He was somewhat dazed, but no serious injuries. I'd much rather be dazed than, otherwise, right? And obviously, hard hats aren't the end all be all, but they do help out as opposed to, for example, injuries like this. We're going to have, I don't even know how many stitches after being struck in the head. Hand protection. So 20% of all disabling workplace injuries involve the hands. This is an example of some dermatitis caused by a chemical exposure. There's an acid burn. So going back to those cost examples, so with dermatitis, for example, you're looking at a combined cost of $21,000. Yeah, maybe that's not that big of a deal in some aspects, but I mean, it's still $21,000. Assuming a 3% profit margin again, you're looking at over $700,000 that you have to have in sales just to recoup those costs. Seems to me, I'd rather just have my employees wear gloves. Seems kind of simple, right? But so many places don't worry about it. And they just, I don't know, I guess they kind of wait for something to happen, right? It feels like that's the way insurance is. Well, that's why I have insurance, right? You guys hear that a lot, or at least it feels like it. And then again, you have to have the right procedures in place and enforcing them. This is a car wash company, and they even have the sign, you have to wear safety glasses. They do provide, safety glasses and goggles and so forth. I would actually clarify on that. If you're doing cotton clothes, you really should be using either goggles or glasses and a shield to protect against chemical splash. And just in case anyone asks, that was not one of my employees. He was at some vendor working on the equipment, so he's not my responsibility in case anyone asks about his shoes or something. Hand protection, very simple example. So the poultry processing facility, they began requiring cut-resistant gloves. Their hand injuries decreased by 90%. Fairly simple solution. Eye protection. So 70% of all eye injuries are from flying or falling objects or sparks striking the eye. So you could have, anytime you're grinding, cutting things, anything that's kind of creating dust or other debris into the air. Strong corrosive liquids can cause permanent damage or blindness if not washed out immediately. So that's from some sodium hydroxide into the eye. That kind of hurts to look at from the air. Welding, you can have the welder's eye, other damage to your cornea, so forth. If you're not wearing the welder's mask to protect from the ultraviolet lights. Same thing for strong lasers or molten metal. Hearing protection. So metal grinder is about 95 decibels. So unless he's doing that for like 5 minutes a day, you really should be wearing hearing protection. A general rule of thumb is if you're about 3 feet away from someone and you're having to shout to be heard, you need hearing protection. You're above these permissible levels. So this will kind of show you, amount of time, decibels. There's a lot of other variables involved, but just as kind of a quick guideline there. So of course you can want to wear earplugs or earmuffs or even both. Just a week or two ago, I was at a concrete company, and they have to have people go inside these mix trucks and do some chipping out, and it's very loud in there. So we were advising them that they should be doing earplugs and earmuffs to help with that noise. So we talked about all these different, steps of the hierarchy. So to kind of mental exercise it through, we're going to go through the hierarchy and pretending that we are a restaurant who's considering, maybe expanding their menu to include fried foods. So we're going to consider the risk presented by these new operations, which would be the fryer. So according to the FDA report on existing or eating and drinking establishments, fryers cause over 1,500 fires per year. That's 30 civilian injuries and $27 million in property damage. According to OSHA, the deep fat fryer burns are the leading cause of burns for food service workers. Deep fat fryer burn hazards, you're having a very highly combustible material, the oil. You're heating it to around 375 degrees. It's regulated around other cooking equipment that could have open flames, like the burners for stove-top grills right next to it. And then just one spark could ignite that oil and cause a fire. Poor maintenance. If you're not maintaining your thermostat, it's not working properly, you overheat. Your gas line to your igniter, if that's in poor condition, you could have combustible fumes leak out into the work area and increase accumulation in your hood duct exhaust. That itself simply won't start a fire, but it will definitely increase the severity of a fire should one occur. So how do we control those hazards? So again, going through kind of the hierarchy, start with avoiding the risk. Maybe you're talking to a company and they say, you know what, we hadn't really thought about all of this. Let's just not even deal with it, you know? For example, maybe it was a company that was offered a really big catering job, but they wanted some fried foods. Well, maybe you just have some other company do the fried food part of it and you handle the rest of it. Can these cooking methods be substituted for another method that's less hazardous? For example, if you get the food that's kind of pre-fried, all you have to do is just bake it to warm it again. And then your engineering controls. So if your restaurant already has NFPA 96, conduct exhaust, and a UL 300 automatic extinguishing system, if you already have those, then your control costs are greatly reduced. So it's a lot easier to move forward with the rest of these controls. Other things you can be doing with things like having the proper clearance between your fryer or baffle between slip-resistant flooring, grease disposal system, those sorts of things. And then your administrative controls. You want to have proper training on the use and the cleaning. Making sure they're not putting water into the grease or overloading it. They're not trying to climb on the fryer to clean around it, those types of things. Regular inspections, maintenance, your automatic extinguishing system, your hood duct exhaust, that fuel shut-off devices, make sure those are being inspected and maintained. What to do in the event of a fire, especially making sure they know about those Class K fire extinguishers. You do not want to use a normal water-type fire extinguisher on a grease fire. It's just going to spread it, make things worse. Those Class K extinguishers are specifically designed to interact with the grease and extinguish that fire. And PPE. So you want to make sure they're wearing long sleeves, long pants, apron, slip-resistant shoes, and when they're cleaning, having the chemical-resistant gloves, safety glasses. So as you see, we kind of went through the whole hierarchy there of how we address this hazard. And that's basically how loss control has to think. It's funny how it changes your whole mentality. I mean, literally just driving here, I was going behind some truck hauling lumber, and I was like, that's not properly secured. Just things you notice. Or as I was standing up there, as Mr. Boyd was talking, you notice that sprinkler head right there is too far recessed in this escutcheon. So it just changes your whole mentality as you go through places. You can't help but like checking fire extinguisher tags and stuff like that as you're walking around. So maybe after hearing all this, you're kind of interested, hey, this sounds like something I'd be interested in doing. You're kind of excited, you want to know more about it, but you're wondering, well, what would the next step be? What should I do if I want to better prepare myself for interviews and stuff to get into loss control? So my kind of career advice for your next steps, we'll start out, we're at the CPCU Society, right? So of course I'd start by telling you about the institutes. They have the Associate in Risk Management, ARM. We've actually got a really cool ARM to CPCU pathway. So you can get your ARM first, and then that helps you as you progress towards the CPCU. Board of Certified Safety Professionals, that's one of the, my most recent certifications. So the Associate Safety Professional is the first one you do, and then the Certified Safety Professional after that. If you go to what's called a QAP, a Qualified Academic Program, that will actually qualify as the ASP. So if you get a degree from certain universities, that will actually take care of the ASP, and then you just do the CSP. The U of A has a Bachelor of Science in Public Health, Environmental and Occupational Health track. And then Gateway Community College, not too far from here, has the Associate in Applied Science degree in Occupational Safety and Health Technology. Job openings. So what kinds of things, where would I look for jobs for these positions, right? You start out at various local industries, obviously ideally being, say, the safety manager for them, but a lot of times even just getting industry experience. A lot of times people will work for, let's say, a roofing contractor, just so you have that hands-on experience, and then you go over to, say, a carrier like Pop Point, that works with the roofers a lot, and you have that hands-on experience of, I used to do roofing, and I know what it's like to wear the harnesses and so forth. So even if it's just an internship, it's valuable experience. Third-party loss control vendors, so there's ISO is a company I used to work for, SEER, various other companies out there, Premier Risk Management. There's those types of companies. There's contract work, obviously. You work for brokers. A lot of these large brokers have their own internal risk and control employees. So like Marshall McLennan and Lockton, for example, work for a carrier like Top Point, as I do. If you're willing to relocate, a lot of opportunities that'll open up there. You know, if we were just talking earlier about what we used to work for, they're based out of Owatonna, Minnesota. So if you're willing to move to Owatonna, Minnesota, it opens up a lot of opportunities in terms of those things, especially for advancement. And I guess I should mention, so a lot of times people, especially early on in their careers, might be wondering, well, what's the pay like? It's so hard to find that information. It's always kind of varied. So just briefly, I mean, so for ISO, for example, I know they tend to start about 55 to 60,000. Working for a carrier, usually you'd be starting about 70,000, and then as you work your way up, be into six figures. So it's a lucrative career. You know, it's not, you know, working call center, customer service or something. And then if you want to be more specialized in loss control, if you're going, well, how can you advance beyond that? Just kind of briefly speak to some of the other things there. So if you enjoy kinesiology, biomechanics, industrial design, ergonomics is a good fit for you. You're designing and modifying the work to the worker, not the other way around. So we always use the expression, work smarter, not harder. That's basically what ergonomics is. So if you want more information on that, check out the Certified Professional Ergonomist through bcbe.org for more info. If you like bioscience, engineering, you have a fire protection engineer. It's the application of science and engineering principles to mitigate, detect, control, or suppress a fire. When I was with ISO, we went in the burn lab, and so this is the heptane and pallets fire. We started a big old fire. We had some early suppression, fast response sprinklers, ESFR sprinkler above it, and you know we watched how the sprinkler activates and put that fire out in about a minute. So it's kind of fun. So if you like lighting stuff on fire and you know watching sprinklers and fire hydrants and so forth, that's a good option. I listed a bunch of different careers in that kind of field. Again, check out the FPA or Society of Fire Protection Engineers for further info. If you like chemistry, that's really kind of the area of industrial hygienists. They do a lot with chemistry. Always things they're looking for, so I'll just kind of, I guess, leave it at that for these purposes. Certified Industrial Hygienist, board for global EHS credentials for more information on that. So a lot of information I've been throwing at you here, just to give you as brief as I can what my entire career is, what it's like working here, and what we actually do. Any questions? Yes, sir.
What was the most resistant client you have ever had? How did you get them to accept some of the things you were suggesting?
Repeat the question if it's on.
What was your most resistant client, and how did you get them to accept some of the suggestions that you gave to them?
So yeah, the first one that comes to mind, and that's a tough question. You try to remember 10 years, experience. The first one that comes to my mind is, so I had this auto repair shop, and so oftentimes, like with ISO, we would do our loss control surveys. We just send that off to the underwriter. What they do with it, it'd be kind of funny because we would never really know. They might be canceling the insured, they might be doing nothing, they might throw the email away, or who knows. So you never kind of really knew. But sometimes you get back another order for what we call a rec check, a recommendation check, saying, hey, and they show me a paper where they signed saying they did everything, go back to kind of make sure. I went back to that place like 5 times over years, and it just was getting worse and worse. It's like, no, they haven't done what we said to do. In fact, it's gotten even worse. Because reality TV these days, he was trying to get on some garage rehab or something like that show where he's like, but they want us to look really bad here, so we're letting it get really bad. And I'm like, so it was kind of every time out there trying to talk to him about, you got to address these issues. And I think finally he ended up giving up after like his second try getting on that show, and he, started addressing it. But yeah, this is the greatest example of how I was able to convince him. It's a matter of him realizing, hey, I guess I need to step up and invest my own money into this business as opposed to hoping some random reality show was going to come in and pay for all these repairs. Because yeah, they were just, the electrical was a mess, they were jury rigging everything, and having heaters, PlayStation, just all sorts of just craziness. So, sorry about that. Any other questions?
So you work with municipalities in a way that, let's say, the police department or the fire department wants some assistance in terms of their loss control. I know that all of them. I have a captain in the Phoenix Fire Department, who's one of my sons, and they are very safety conscious. But I wonder, about the insurance that's provided on loss control services that are provided as well.
Yeah, so we work with municipalities. Police and fire are kind of a fun new ballgame. I forget how many, a couple years ago, there was some, legal changes that happened with cancer rates, and things that are supposed to be there. So that's been largely is handled separately now. But yes, we work with municipalities as well. And but yeah, there probably are, more specialized hospital people that would work, for example, just with, our first responders and addressing those concerns. So there are definitely significant, very specialized concerns for that. They're dealing with totally different chemicals that most people wouldn't be dealing with, and having to go into situations that most people wouldn't be having to go into. We work with social workers who are dealing with people with substance abuse issues, right? And so imagine it's just kind of the nature of the job that you're going to have a bad individual that's going to strike employees. And so we have to teach them about de-escalation tactics and all those types of things. That's the fun thing about loss control is you're constantly dealing with new kinds of industries and trying to figure out how can we keep your employees safe, keep your property safe. Municipalities reminds me, school safety, huge issue, right? So a lot of talk about what we call CPCU, so crime prevention through environmental design. So what kind of things can we implement to try to deter any of these kinds of issues? What kind of access do they have to the buildings? What are you doing to stop people? All sorts of things. Constantly learning and trying to adapt to overcome those hazards.
So real quick, we have a question from Sarah Schumacher, who's on Zoom. Will loss control evolve going forward, given remote hybrid environment, in addition to recent worker compensation litigation for remote workers?
Yes, so definitely, so as mentioned, pretty much all loss control work from home. And sorry, I was going to say that. But that's something we've heard a lot more is the questions about like ergonomics for work from home employees, how do you have to set up properly? I would want to mention that OSHA has made very clear that they would not do any kind of, even if there's a complaint, do any inspections of someone's home. So if you have an employee saying, oh, I'm not set up properly, I don't have a sit-stand desk at their home, that's kind of outside of your control. You can, involve them and give them training on how to do that properly, how to properly set up a desk and so forth. But if they're needing a lot of assistance, they're probably going to go back to the office for that kind of assistance.
Right, the de-escalation efforts on your children and how effective has that been?
What's funny is, so I was doing a workplace violence training. There's a landscape contractor, and they had a crew get into a fight amongst themselves. And so they're like, hey, we should have workplace violence. They never thought they need to have that training, right? But so they had me out to do some training. And as I'm talking about how to communicate with someone that's getting aggressive and the things to say and not say, I realized I don't actually do that with my own wife. You don't do the whole, you and, all that stuff. And I mean, I can't remember all the examples off the top of my head, but it's kind of funny. It's like, do as I say, not as I do, right? Kind of thing. It's, I probably should be taking my own advice in just normal communication with my own family.
So this is Lamont. I'm going to take a copy of this and show it to my wife just to see how that goes over. See if the de-escalation thing is going to work at all. Do you think that'd be a good idea? Probably not. No, probably not. Any other questions? Anybody have a question that you'd like to ask from an underwriting perspective or from a claims perspective that might integrate some loss control activities?
Would you say a majority of your clients, do they range small all the way to large? What's I would say your profile of your average client?
So it'll depend on the company you're working for and what their clientele are. I've worked with everything from a 2-person operation up to thousands of employees. Currently with PowerPoint, I work with just the larger accounts. Generally speaking, mostly over $100,000 workers' comp premium. But some higher hazard industries, like roofers, for example, will do those down to $25,000 premium. Generally speaking, just the larger accounts is who they'll have loss control working with. And definitely just depends on the company you're working for. Some large brokerages, and like I talked earlier about, some places might have a territory of multiple states. That's going to be, you're probably only working with accounts that are say $250,000 or more in premium, very kind of large accounts.
Yes.
So I'm an underwriter for property and I've been recently seeing a lot of Bitcoin and crypto mining types of risks. So is there any types, have you had any experience with those? Do you know any of the emerging hazards that they have with Bitcoin mining?
Sure, and so for property purposes, you're probably referring to fire hazard maybe associated with all of that. Do you have a lot of heat or even maybe even the security aspect of all the servers and everything? So, and that's why it's no, I haven't experienced it, but just that's immediately where my mind goes. Okay, what hazards are posed here, right? You're dealing with a lot of heat, a lot of very expensive computer equipment, any kind of water damage that's going to totally wipe it out. Security hazards. These might be in not the greatest of areas. Probably in warehouses, things like that. They can easily, the wrong people in that neighborhood find out what's in there. They're going to grab all those computers. So yeah, you look at the security, and then for a higher level operation, you're dealing with like server, database, warehouses. There's specialized, sprinkler type systems specifically for, work with the electronics, but that's going to be obviously higher level. A lot of these Bitcoin miners aren't going to be kind of to that level. Sorry to answer your question more directly. No, I personally don't have much experience working with this.
One more question. You mentioned.
He said one more, guys.
No, that's fine. There's one more after that. You mentioned at least 10 years experience. Over time, have you seen a shift when it comes to like agents and brokers with their attitude towards loss control, with making it either more common or more open to it?
Yeah, I'd say that's very dependent on the company. I mean, overall, so I've worked with 3 different companies now. It really just depends on the company and how they kind of integrate things. And then when you're working with lots of different brokers, it can be kind of hit or miss with each broker you're working with. Yeah, some people love you, and especially if you're with a company like when I was with the captive insurer. So you're only working with your agents, right? And you're partnered with them. You're with the same 10 people all the time, and you often are attending these meetings together. And those situations definitely help kind of that communication and letting them know, hey, I'm here to help. I'm not OSHA. I'm not showing up here trying to get you a citation because we need that funding to continue our operations. Is frankly what they do, and that's how they pay for their bills. So I'm there to help. I'm a consultant. I'm here to help you out. So much of my time is just kind of putting them at ease and helping out in that respect. So when you have that kind of agent relationship, it helps out with that a lot. And when you work with numerous agents, it's about kind of forming those relationships. And so that I would say is also part of the career as well as being able to form those relationships and make them feel more at ease, let them know you're on their side, and kind of more loss control per se perspective. Sometimes you might go somewhere and you might see 10 things wrong, but that's not going to start off a relationship very well, right? If you go in there and you've got this list of 10 things of, hey, you fix this stuff and you're canceled. Like, how good is that relationship, right? So you can go in and maybe you identify some of the bigger hazards, potentials that can be taken care of, and kind of work your way through the rest. That's the other benefit when you're working with a client for a long term. Hey, well, I'm going to be back here in 3 months or 6 months, so I can address some of these things later on. Where I was with like ISO, for example, well, it might be my one time going out there, and if I don't put something in the report, underwriter might come back at me. So you have to make sure you put kind of everything in there. Those don't kind of go as well, but yeah, it just depends on your role there.
Then the last question online from Sandy Masters. What loss control trends are you seeing because of the labor shortage?
Yes, that's been, I can tell you how many business owners, executives I talk to, number one issue everyone's been having for the past 2 years is they can't find employees, period, let alone skilled employees. I remember one of my plumbing company, they had one plumber for all the Phoenix metro area. Like, they were hurt. They're like, do you know any plumber? I'm like, well, yeah, I know other plumbers, but they're not going to say, yeah, we can use that my employees, right? So yeah, imagine that one plumber for all of Phoenix metro. They're hurt. I was talking to a framing company recently, and they're like, it used to be we could get someone that has carpentry experience, but now it's like, you worked at Jack in the Box, okay, come on over, we'll train you, right? So that's when these new employee training programs are so much more important. You have to make sure In general, you want to still try to screen those employees, make sure you're getting good employees, but you now can't rely on, oh, they've got all this industry experience. You have to deal with these employees that have no experience and train them up from there. And that's where a lot of these injuries and things we're seeing are coming from, is because they don't have that good experience. They have been doing this for 15 years.
Well, let's have a round of applause for William.
Thank you.
William and I have been coordinating on this for several months, and I know the time and effort he put into it. And we want to thank Copper Point for allowing him to do it. And so thank you again.
Thank you all for your time.
We'll now take a short break.